UFOs even around Oklahoma and other places. What would you have your thoughts on that? Can you advise us?
Well, in the past, it was easy to fake a lot of stuff. There have been a lot of things that have come up. There are a lot of, let's say, government cover-ups, utilization of these kinds of stories to obviously keep the public from paying attention to the real facts, such as testing of military aircraft of certain types. But at the end of the day, there are some things I can talk about life elsewhere in the universe, and I think the Bible has some answers to that. But with the deep fakes and things that are going on today, some of the things I've even seen, like you've seen, like on Capitol Hill, there was a Senate committee that met earlier this year on looking at artifacts of things moving very quickly in the sky. And there's a lot of space tracking going on today with various natural objects and also man-made objects. And just because you spot it with your telescope doesn't necessarily mean you know what you're looking at. So there's a lot we could talk about on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Anybody? Come on.
I'll kick in a question
There we go,
real quick.
brother.
All right, I'm ready and set for this one because I didn't have time to get it in here.
David first.
But the question I'll ask is, what about life elsewhere in the universe? What if we ever find it? And also, does it truly exist? Well, let's first consider what the Bible has to say about this. And let's skip ahead here to a couple of things. All right. That's not the slide I wanted. Actually. 115 verses 15 and 16, New American Standard says, "May you be blessed by the Lord, maker of heaven," and that's actually heavens plural, "and the earth. The heavens are the heavens of the Lord, but the earth he has given to the sons of mankind." Isaiah 45 verse 12, NIV says, "It is I who made the earth and created mankind on it." Acts 17 verse 26, New King James Version, "And he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and boundaries and of their dwelling." So it's a place they dwell. From these passages we find the earth was made for man, and likewise that man was made for the earth. Even the scientific community agrees that without certain unique properties, humans would not be able to survive on earth, and certainly those same properties must exist for them to live anywhere. The size and the rotational velocity, the composition of our planet, the distance and energy output of the sun, meaning its temperature, presence of an ocean or water, having a single moon, having predictive tides, presence of an ocean, I mentioned that one, strength of a magnetic and gravitational field, gas composition and density of our atmosphere, and a lot more. Atheists say we are extremely lucky to have such precise alignment of all these random variables. They also believe that based on the scale of the universe, there must surely be other planets like ours on which life also began and successfully evolved. For the rest of us, we clearly see his invisible attributes through his perfectly designed creation, Romans 1 verse 20. It is according to his divine purpose, not luck, that we exist on the earth. And we also learn from Scripture that only man was made in God's image and was given dominion over all things on the earth. Genesis 1:26, "And God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." Nothing else was made in the likeness of God besides man. Nothing else was given dominion over all other living things. Nothing else has a moral accountability or will face judgment. Nothing else will be described as having an immortal spirit, promised a resurrected body, and identified in heaven. However, there are spiritual beings called angels present in heaven, which have visited the earth throughout its history. Kind of back to your point on UFOs here. Maybe other alien sightings. Based on their description in the Bible, it is accurate to consider them as this: supernatural, multi-dimensional, and alien visitors. Although the academic side of our scientific community, mostly atheists and agnostics, don't believe in angels such as are described in the Bible, they are open to supernatural, multidimensional aliens, which we just described. And so long as the things are similar to those things conjured in science fiction or portrayed in movies, but not angels of the Bible, because that would open them up to the religious notions and accountability to God. Now, while one could argue semantics of Genesis 6:17 regarding all flesh under heaven or just life on the earth, Genesis 7 verse 15, makes it clear that all flesh in which is the breath of life boarded the ark built by Noah. Additionally, God speaks of the life of every living thing exclusively in the context of the earth, Job 12 verses 7 through 10. And so it is no wonder why atheists are so earnest in their search for extraterrestrial life. They want to disprove the Bible and therefore disprove the existence and their accountability to God. Thanks for giving me a few extra minutes to get all that in there.
Good deal. All right, we've got 3-1 so far. Brother David Griffin.
Okay, thanks, Brent. Well, after what you just said, I guess my question seemed kind of out of a clear blue sky. No pun intended. But, actually, I have a two-pronged question. And this is one you hear all the time. All of us have probably heard this, but I'd just like to hear what you have to say about it. In Genesis, chapter 1, the creation account, verse 3, the Lord said, "Let there be light." And then that's the second day. And then down on verse 16, it tells that he made the two great lights, the sun and the moon, etc. And so one of the questions is, you've got light created on one day, and you've got what we think of now as the sources of light created 2 days later. Okay, that's prong number one. The other one is at the end of verse 16, where he says, "And he made the stars also," which is, as you've demonstrated, one of the greatest understatements of the whole Bible. But I seem to remember when I was a youngster in school that light travels, correct me if I'm wrong, 186,000 miles per second. Is that right?
That's right.
I remember that.
That's good.
Don't remember much from my grade school, but I remember that.
That's good.
But anyway, given the great distance of stars from us, light took time to get here. And so the great distance would mean a lot of time to get here. Some of those stars, under this assumption, would not be visible even yet. And some people point to this as some sort of proof that the Bible is mythological or not true. So if you understand my question, you can probably explain it better than I can. I'd just like to hear what you have to say about those kind of two things, if you would.
Thank you. No, those are two great questions. I get the first one a lot, and the second one I also get at a high frequency. The first one is really a chicken and egg kind of situation, right? It's even in the case of the atheists, they've got to deal with this in the evolutionary Big Bang theory, right? Even if you can get everything in the universe condensed down to one particular thing, cosmic egg, where's the cosmic chicken in all of this? So they also have similar problems. The issue with the light, though, is actually fairly straightforward. Light is a thing. It isn't just some visible part of just seeing an object, but the light we see that's reflecting off of it or traveling through space goes back to the void of space. There's things traveling through it, and one of those things is both visible and invisible arrays of energy. And in the case of light, which is a visible array of energy, what it really is saying there in day 2 is that God solves the distance problem on the second question you actually asked. And that is how do you ultimately see things that are millions of light years, or if not billions of light years away? Well, you just fill the gap. You create the light that connects your eye to all of those objects. And so the great thing about it is we really don't even have proof the actual source of light is there. All we see is the light. And so God creates the light initially. And so with the light already being created, what he really says later on, and that he makes the stars, is he creates the thing that ultimately is going to emit that light or connect the 2 points. And so that's an interesting situation. And so when it talks about too, that God is light, it's no coincidence also that God is the light in the very beginning, before anything is really put in place. Obviously you have the earth there in the very beginning. But in the end, after everything is dissolved and melted away, it talks about very clearly that in the heavenly abode, God is its light. And there is neither the light of the sun or the moon. I mean, there's no moon or sun. We don't need them. God is able to put light in place, and of course he's an eternal light as well. I don't know if that answered everything, but hopefully it at least kind of resolves some of that.
Brother David P. and then Brother Glenn Osborne.
Thank you, Brent. I graduated high school in 1986, and at the end of my school year, the universe was 4.5 billion years old. And then 3 months later, I started college, and it was older. And I just looked it up just now. It's now almost 14 billion years old, according to everybody, because you have to keep on.
Oh yeah,
right. And so I have a semi-related question about the age of the Earth in particular, and the speed of light. I appreciate David quoting that. I saw a T-shirt years ago that said, "It's not just the law. It's not just a good idea. It's the law."
Yeah, right.
But I remember reading about 20 years ago that there were some scientists in Australia that had determined or discovered that the speed of light was subject to the second law of thermodynamics. But it also was slowing down. And when you account for that, then all of these electron dating and all this stuff came down to 8 to 10,000 years. Is this even in your topic? Is this fair?
No, I understand it though. I think you've got some solid math and engineering understanding yourself. So think about it as an XY plot, because what is ultimately velocity? It's time over distance, right? So when we think about these plots and information about how do we even determine, how do we know that? That's theoretical, it's hypothesized. But, when we think about all that's out there in the speed of light and all the data that would fill up this big graph on an XY chart, we're all down here playing in this one point, still at the XY axis, 0 mark, because we haven't measured anything really significant enough to really know much. Think about it. The only known object we have control over that we can physically ping with radio to also get some other information from is Voyager. And Voyager is now passed out, beyond Pluto. It's on its way into interstellar space. And it's still going to be a few years to get to 1 light day. That gives you an idea of the scale of those time elements. And so that is really, really hard to know for certain, and I don't know if we'll ever know. It'll just be something we will come to assume, just like evolution and Big Bang. We'll just assume it. Back to your age, yeah, it was 13.7 billion years when I graduated college in 2002. It moved up to 13.8 just even a year ago, and now with the latest James Webb Telescope data and information, it's not just 14, it's already pushing out to 15 and beyond, because we're seeing fully matured galaxies at 13.5 billion light years. And that the way they can calculate that's pretty accurate if you don't believe in some kind of change in light speed. And so, anyway, with that being the case, there's a great debate out there. I love it that the more we find, the more they really don't understand. And that's kind of an interesting thing. I always say evolutionists are the only ones that get to evolve their theory. We have a Bible, a true standard. We understand it to be inspired, and it just has to stand up to all of time. And so far, it still meets that expectation.
Did you have your hand up? Okay, let's stop here, please, and then we'll go to Glenn.
So I just want to I'm just curious on something, thank you for the teaching as well. I've seen topics of, and I've seen documents on how, yes, I'm not saying I believe in the Big Bang Theory at all, but I do believe in the day by day that it states in Genesis, but that the I should say, diagrams of the Big Bang Theory, or I think people are starting to see that point back to the book of Genesis. I was like, can you expound on that, please?
Yeah, so that was one of the slides I just kind of went perusing by here just a moment ago. Here's actually a picture I've used in other lessons talking about the Big Bang. Now, first of all, this scale is not even linear, right? If you look, you're looking at, thousandths of a second to seconds to minutes to hours to days to hundreds of thousands of years to millions and billions and so forth, and it gets out to that 13.7 or 13.8 billion time frame. And of course, the new discoveries of fully evolved galaxies in the visible light space that shouldn't exist is already breaking the model. And so what originally was the idea is that due to what's called red shifting, and that's a red light shift that I'm making a reference to. Let me get to a picture of it. Sorry, I've got it here. So this is a picture using spectral light to look at stars and also galaxies. And what you notice is it's obvious. You see reds and blues, right? So what happens is if an object is moving away or moving towards, it either compresses or expands the light frequency, the energy frequency. And it comes out in spectral light as red or blue. Blue is moving towards us, red is moving away from us. And Edwin Hubble in 1929 was the first to really understand this. And what Hubble had noted is that he would see, and it's because he couldn't see all the spectral blue. It's really hard to see, especially back in 1929 visual data. But what he noticed was the red. The red was obvious to him. And so what he had concluded was you have an ever-expanding universe from a point source, because everything seemed to be moving away from a center. And so that's been even the Big Bang theory. Big Bang, it explodes from one point in space and everything moves out. Now there should be some symmetry to the movement of space, but what we're starting to see and understand with all the new sky mapping tools and technologies and satellites is that's not true. In fact, this picture is a great example of it. You have things moving towards you and away from you because you see both the visible blues and reds. So it turns out it's a very random universe. There may be some local expansion, but there's some movements that are just absolutely blowing the minds of the astronomers today. And so even those who are trying to theorize and trying to come up with some kind of quantifiable, calculation in the quantum, realm, they can't get their head around this. And that's why now they've gone towards an infinite scaled universe, and that supposedly universes started randomly multiple times. Therefore, you get this weird disruption of things moving in all kinds of directions. So, is the chance of that starting with the Big Bang once to now multiples, thousands, if not millions of opportunities like that? And then they get into multiverse, which says, okay, I can compound that with even more opportunity. They're just really reaching for straws, and they're just trying to blow up the numbers big enough that somehow, some way, the odds of starting life would ultimately come into play. And so they have no proof of any of it, though.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question.
Glenn Osmond and then David Griffin.
I think your last statement is really revealing there. I just want to say, I think that just as whenever you look at the history of scientific thought, and they try to understand, we try to understand, and we can nail down some things and then try to build on those and go on. It has given us knowledge, but we try to put God in a box. I guess is where I'm going with this. Is because even with Einstein's theory, of relativity and time and space and all of this together, that came up with the Big Bang, the quantum physics is messing some of that up, of course, but quasars and black holes and stuff that comes out of it, when they have shown that the light coming out of a quasar is like 8 times the speed of light. And they're trying to get their head around that. Well, if they do, then it's gonna mess with everything. I mean, time and the concept of history and everything, like you said. And I just wanna remind all of us, we are humans. We're trying to understand our world, and the more we discover, the more it gives glory to God. And that's what that statement that you started out with comes back to. I can see God standing up there and saying, oh, they're just about to discover this. Yes, now they've discovered it again. All it does is open to us the mind of God and how much greater it is than us trying to put him into a box. Right. And so I really appreciate your talk. But I think what we need to be reminded of by your presentation is how infinitely small and helpless we can be when we try to understand God from a purely physical standpoint. Right. And time. And I just really appreciate you showing that this is glorious, and all science really does is continue to tell us that this box that we try to put God in can't continue.
Right. No, that's good points, and we've talked about some of these things in the past, and I've heard your illustration of God having the aha moments of, oh, okay, they're about to figure it out, and I love that. And I almost quoted you on that during the lesson, so, but very good points, thank you.
David Griffin, and then Brad Shockley.
Well, I don't know, maybe this question is something I can just ask you personally later, but I'm just curious. I'm trying to understand what we're seeing there. I am aware, I think I'm correct, but when we go outside at night and we look up in the sky, we see stars. We're seeing stars, but some of those white specks are not stars. Well, we're seeing stars which are millions of light years away. And interspersed among them are not stars, but actual other galaxies that are way farther out past our galaxy. They look like stars, but that little white speck, in some cases, is a whole glut of galaxy. So, I'm looking up in the sky and I'm thinking some of what I'm seeing is stars, some are actual galaxies of stars. What is that? I mean, those red and blue dots, not dots, but the star, is that stars, or is that galaxies, or?
It's a combination.
It's a combination.
It's a combination, yeah, because you're gonna see the overlap as you look down into deep space. And what really it's just measuring though is it's trying to understand that light. This is all about infrared and ultraviolets, trying to see those reds and blues. You won't see this with your naked eye, right? Even if you had a great telescope, this has to be adjusted through computer computation. But we do know that whether there's a slight stretch or compression of the light. So all it's trying to do is just get an idea of relative movement one to another.
Yeah, I was just curious about that. It says 19, is that Hubble?
Yeah, Hubble 1929, the redshift, yeah. That's where the first discovered redshifts.
Obviously enhanced. That's not an original.
No, it's not original. This is a very recent photo here.
Yeah, okay. All right, I was just curious.
Yeah.
Brad Shockley. Anybody else? Raise your hand.
Thank you, sir. Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Hubble from a small town that you spent your boyhood days?
Yeah, I will never be more popular than him in my hometown.
It is kind of neat. You don't think about that. But
Right.
Here's my question. You gave us how to answer it with Titus chapter 3. Why do we have so many church members, I'm not talking about just people in the world, that are now denying things like the moon landing and insisting on a flat earth? And does that give us any, should we be concerned with how people view that, or outsiders view that when they come to church and they hear, after church is over, these wild theories that are being thrown around today?
Yeah. So yeah, I referenced that multiple times through my lesson, and it is interesting that we have so many, not only amongst the church, but I'll be honest, there are teachers and preachers who also hold these views. And it's concerning to me because, you know, the link between my topic and Brett's topic is eyewitness testimony. And in the case of eyewitness testimony, it wouldn't have been great, you know, 2,000 years ago that we had all of these ring cameras and everything around. We see Jesus walking the streets. That would be easy. That'd be a nice way to know. But we only know from the eyewitness testimony of individuals. I like how Paul puts it in 1 Corinthians 15 when he talks about that when the Lord had been seen by over 500 at once. He goes on and he emphasizes some of whom are which are still here today. He talks that there are those who fall asleep and passed. But in any case, the point is that the eyewitness testimony is strong, but what's more important is you have the living that can substantiate it. And in that day, they had the opportunity to verify whether or not the eyewitness testimony had certain accuracy. And one thing we don't find in history is we don't find any counter proof that Jesus supposedly was still dead in the grave and wasn't seen by masses of people, even though the ability to go out and interview them was certainly a possibility. In today's world, literally to get to these positions and views of flat earth, we've never been to the moon, and the Holocaust never existed, all these different things, you have to purposefully ignore fact. You have to purposefully ignore eyewitness testimony and accounts that make those historically accurate. You know, if 500 plus is the number for the resurrection, and that's sufficient to cause our brethren to believe in the resurrection, then why is 700 plus astronauts who literally left Earth's orbit or gravitational space to ultimately see the Earth as we see it in these images and photos, that isn't good enough? And of course, I've had some, even recently, just a few days ago, and I was rolling this lesson out in some practice runs. Some individuals didn't want to hear the lesson, and that's kind of interesting. They don't even want to hear the lesson, but have already positioned themselves on their opinion of this matter, but want to counter and attack like NASA, as if NASA is some group of individuals in a back room that has control over all of this. And no, today, you know, we have various space administrations, universities, private industry, including now tourism, that is now allowing individuals to go to space, providing live shots, video streams, everything to disprove all of this. And yet we have brethren who want to just literally ignore all of that. And they want to ignore it when they, right now, with living astronauts, you can go and interview them. I mean, I invite anyone to go down to Johnson in Houston to go down and actually interview astronauts who are available on daily tours. Ask them themselves, you know, the dumb questions that I would certainly not encourage, but please go do it. But when they put their lives on the line, including individuals, like I've met Jack Schmidt, who's been on the moon, spent an entire day with him. I've met others too. I've had interviews with them. I've talked to them. I've seen images, including some of their blunders. You know, I mean, nothing like getting all the raw footage and seeing how many times they trip and fall on themselves and almost kill themselves on the moon. But it's happened. But in any case, people can go interview them as eyewitnesses and verify for themselves. But instead, they put their head in the sand and they watch YouTube all day and just jack the income up in the pockets of these individuals who know that there is people out there who are willing to keep clicking on this material and continue to pad their pockets and believe in this nonsense. And that's why I, you know, quoted what I quoted about, you know, these are foolish arguments and debates to even get involved with, even amongst our own brethren. And really what they do at the end of the day, unfortunately, they undermine all of our attempts to try to prove God, try to prove the inspiration of the scriptures. They undermine the ability to keep our young people in the church. And I talk to many of our young people who are dissuaded from the gospel because they come to find out these things are lies, and they put them on par with everything else they've been taught. And if that's a lie, then they're all lies. And so that's probably the biggest warning to take away today is for those that are out there and that are promoting those things ignorantly, they're doing a real disservice for the Lord.
Brother Madison.
I'll be quick because I know the time is getting short.
Yes, 3 minutes left. Yeah.
I'm on it. So when you look at, and thank you again for what you've said, a lot of that stuff was over my head. I'd be like a ball and.
It's all over our head, yes.
So then what I'm gonna present is Deuteronomy 29 and 29, when people try to figure out God and try to figure out the mind of God. The Bible said the secret things, there's some things that we ain't gonna never know about God. But what God has revealed through his word, as you said, those are the things that we can hold on to. Isaiah says in Isaiah chapter 40, verses 13 and 14, now who has counseled God? Who has ever asked God, why did you do this, or why did you do that? Or who did God go to and ask, could he get permission to do any of those things from very creation? No one. So when you get to 1 Corinthians 2 and 16, he says, the Apostle Paul says, who have known the mind of God? No one. But he's given us the mind of Christ that we may be instructed by God.
Now, amen to that. And I'm so glad that we don't get dressed down like Job did at the end of Job either. And I do hope there's a fantastic multi-thousand-year Q&A session when we get to heaven, because we all have questions and we would all love to know more. And but that's the thing, is we get to just really appreciate just how amazing he is. And like what Glenn said, we try to put him in a box. People use phrases like wants to compare him to the man upstairs. No, he's not a man. He's not even close. He is so beyond our conceivable understanding, just based on what we see, that we have to be in awe. We should be drawn to grope for him, as Paul says. We should be in a position that we want. In fact, I would just say, there are atheists all throughout the world who are groping for him, not even knowing they're groping for him, because everything they spend their time trying to understand is a pursuit of truth and knowledge, and that truth and knowledge should ultimately point to God. And that's why at the end, we will, none of us will be with excuse when we stand before him in the judgment. And as I also like to say, is there will be no atheists on the day of judgment. So that's also important to remember. So thank you.
Would you like to summarize anything?
No, I think the questions were great, and I appreciate the opportunities. Like I said, we got to go down some rabbit holes, but what's interesting is just how all of this, even in this subject, just goes once again to show the tremendous harmony of the scriptures and how many things that may appear trivial point ultimately back to really important topics. You know, faith being at the center of it. So I appreciate it. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you so much. We appreciate